The first time I saw Luna, the city outside the 24-hour gym had already folded in on itself, streets slick with rain and neon bleeding through puddles like liquid candy, and I wondered whether anything good ever really happened after midnight, or if I was simply forcing my life to fit the hours I had left. My day job devoured light and sanity in equal measure, and by the time I signed the last email and shut down my computer, morning belonged to other people, not to me, so the algorithm that served me her profile, no daytime slots, strictly nocturnal training, results guaranteed, felt less like a suggestion and more like fate winking from a dark corner. I booked before I could overthink it and walked into a gym that smelled faintly of disinfectant and eucalyptus. Empty, but for the board attendant at the desk and the woman waiting by the squat rack with a clipboard in her hand and a gaze that cut through the dim like a lighthouse beam. And when she said my name, Sophia, I forgot every excuse I had planned to make about being out of shape or out of time because her voice was low and smooth and oddly soothing. The kind of voice you want to follow into the unknown just to see if it stays steady when the ground drops away, and the light caught the line of her cheekbone, the porcelain smoothness of her skin, the way her dark hair fell sleek and straight as if rain and humidity had never been invented. She didn't shake my hand, only nodded with a smile that felt contained and private, like something valuable she was lending me, and said we'd start with a movement screen, a flexibility test, nothing dramatic tonight. We'll go slow, which was a lie we both agreed to because within 10 minutes she had me bracing and hinging and discovering small fires in muscles I'd neglected for years, and yet it wasn't the burn that surprised me. It was the way she watched. Not like a hawk waiting to pounce on weakness, but like a cartographer mapping the country of my body with patience and respect, tapping lightly at my ribs to remind me to breathe, ghosting a palm across my lower back to cue alignment, her touch so precise it felt like the difference between static and music. The gym's late playlist cycled from lo-fi beats to a slow synth track that made the air feel denser, and whenever I sneaked a glance at her reflection in the mirrors, I kept noticing things that didn't add up. How her forearms seemed sculpted but unstrained, how she moved with coiled economy as if she had trained the very idea of effort to obey her, how her skin never flushed or slicked with sweat despite the steady pace she set for me, how she ignored the bottled waters lined up on the counter and the protein bars near the register like they were props from a play she'd already seen 100 times. Hydrate, she reminded me when my breath sawed, passing me a chilled bottle she didn't open for herself. And when I teased that she was immune to basic biology, she only smiled and said, I'm well practiced, which somehow sounded both coy and honest, both too old and exactly right for a woman who looked 20-something but carried herself like the centuries had been kind to her posture. By the end of our first hour, my legs shook and my cheeks burned, and my chest felt clean, winded but clean, the kind of fatigue that empties you in a way that makes space for something better. And she handed me a towel and walked me through a cool-down that felt suspiciously like choreography. Lengthen, breathe, notice, then asked about my goals with professional calm, and I said the usual things about strength and posture and energy, all of which were true, none of which were complete, because even in that first session it was obvious that what I wanted most was to feel awake in my own life again, and for reasons I couldn't articulate, I sensed she could get me there. We booked 3 nights a week, and I left promising myself not to fall in love with someone whose business hours began where mine ended, a promise I shattered on night 2 when she adjusted my shoulder during a row, and I forgot the world long enough to remember I had a heart. Patterns etched themselves quickly. The gym near empty save for a couple of graveyard shift regulars and the custodian who sang softly while mopping, the hum of fluorescent lights softened by the amber glow of a few lamps she switched on in the corner. Overhead lights are too harsh, she said, and I agreed because under this honeyed dusk, she looked unreal. The way our sessions began with silence and breath, and then filled with conversation that flowed like water finding its level, easy and inevitable, skipping small talk and slanting toward the essential without feeling heavy. Favorite poems, the cities we missed, the first time we each realized the body could be both a home and a battleground, and she never volunteered much about herself. Not the way people usually deploy anecdotes as currency, but when I asked a question, she answered with a focus that felt like a gift rather than a deflection, and if I lingered too long near the edges of her past, she would smile and redirect, Not cruelly, just with the competence of someone who knew how to guard the center of the maze. Still, the puzzle pieces collected themselves. She worked only at night, never booked early mornings or lunch hours, always wore long sleeves no matter how warm the room, had a watch with no brand I recognized, and a way of listening that made me feel known down to the hinges of my bones. The first time I joked about vampire hours, she laughed, a soft, surprised thing that made me stupidly proud, and said, "Night suits me." And I thought of moths and tide pools and the quiet sanctuaries of the world that reveal themselves only after the day is done. Sometimes when she smiled, I swore I saw the faintest glint at her canines. Nothing dramatic, more suggestion than fact, and I told myself to stop inventing mythologies. For women I found beautiful, but the mind loves a story, and mine began to write long before I admitted it was doing so, and on nights when she stood too close, aligning my stance by sliding the edge of her hand against my ankle or the curve of my hip, I could feel the temperature change where her skin met mine. Not cold exactly, more like absence of heat, a quiet, not unpleasant, just startling. The results came fast enough to feel intoxicating. My posture uncurled, my sleep evened out. The midday crashes that used to bully me into silence retreated, and I started to look forward to the hour when the world went dim and I became something clearer under her guidance. And on the rare night, I almost canceled because work had chewed me to gristle. She texted 5 words, "Come as you are, we'll breathe." And I went, because there was a magnet in me now tuned to the frequency of her name. Attraction is a funny animal. It creeps and pounces, sometimes all at once, and one Tuesday around 2. In the morning, while holding the last plank of a long series, my arms trembling, she crouched beside me, whispering, "Eyes on me," and I did, and the room narrowed to her mouth forming the count. 5, 4, don't run, 3, stay, 2, yes, and when she said 1, she didn't clap or praise. She just looked at me like I had touched a door inside myself and actually opened it, and that look did more for my strength than any protein shake ever could. Afterward, she guided me through stretches, slow and deliberate, her thumb pressing into the knot near my shoulder blade until something melted, and I exhaled a sound that was not entirely polite for public spaces, and we both laughed, the kind of shaky laugh that acknowledges a boundary without pretending it doesn't exist. And she said, "You carry the world here." And I said, "Do you have a remedy?" And she said, "Consistency." But the way she held my gaze promised other answers if I learned the right questions. I began to notice the small rituals she kept, as if they were the rails of a bridge we were walking across together. The way she always wiped down equipment with a focus bordering on ceremonial, the way her eyes tracked the room before she let herself relax, the way she never stood in direct drafts from the AC, the way she declined the post-workout smoothie the attendant offered with a gentle "another time" that felt like a refrain. And one night when I forgot my water bottle, she shared her own, but after I took a sip, I realized the cap hadn't been broken, and I wondered how long it had been sitting at the bottom of her bag, and why something in me was disappointed at the possibility that it was just a prop. I told myself to stop reading novels into gym sessions and failed spectacularly when a thunderstorm rolled over the city and the windows shook with a kind of drama usually reserved for cheap cinema. And she dimmed the lamps further and said we'd focus on mobility, let the storm do the heavy lifting. And for 20 minutes we moved in sync, slow circles and deep breaths, and I felt like a tide being taught by the moon how to rise without swallowing the shore. Afterward, we stood by the glass watching rain wash the parking lot into mirrors, and she asked if I ever felt like my life had started without me, and I said yes too quickly, and she nodded like she understood the ache behind the answer, and then she reached up to tuck a damp strand of hair behind my ear, fingers grazing the shell just lightly, and the air went bright. The next week I caught her reflection catching mine in the mirror as I deadlifted, her head tipped as if listening to something below the music, and when I set the bar down she said, "Do you ever feel like you've known someone longer than the calendar allows?" And my laugh came out softer than I meant it to, because yes, that's exactly what it felt like. Familiarity with no source. A conversation that started before the first hello. I asked how long she'd been training clients, and she said long enough. And when I pressed, she added 10 years. But it came with a pause that felt measured, like choosing a dress from a closet full of decades and deciding which one fit the season. and I swallowed the question I wanted to ask, the one that began with why and ended with night. In the second month, she gave me a program, handwritten, not an app or a spreadsheet, crisp graphite on thick paper that smelled faintly of cedar, and I carried it like a letter from a world where I didn't feel perpetually behind, and on its last page she'd written a note in tiny script, "You're stronger than your story," and I stared at it long enough for the ink to memorize my pulse, and that night when we moved through a series of split squats she stood behind me, steadying my balance with a palm near my ribs, and I turned my head just enough to say thank you without words, which is to say, I breathed and didn't look away. Everything sharpened and blurred at once after that. Work was still work. Bills were still bills, but I felt less like a spectator and more like a participant in my own hours, and Luna became the axis around which my evenings spun, a point of gravity that made the rest make sense. And if I sometimes left with questions about the way her pupils held light, about why her presence felt like déjà vu tenderized into wonder, I told myself curiosity is not indictment, it's an invitation, and anyway some answers bloom better at the edge of patience. A Friday. Near the end of our third month, the gym was emptier than usual, the attendant asleep on his stool, the clocks blinking from a brief power flicker, and we stretched on the turf in a wedge of warm light while the rest of the world went dark and wet beyond the glass, and the hush between us felt charged, not awkward. And when I asked impulsively, "What do you want most that you cannot have?" she didn't deflect, she closed her eyes and said, "To be known completely and still be safe." And I said, "Maybe safety is a smaller word than we think," and she opened her eyes, and the way she looked at me made a promise I could feel in my bones even if it wasn't spoken aloud. When we said goodnight, she didn't offer a high five or a distant wave. She placed 2 fingers lightly at my wrist where the pulse beats loudest and said, "Steady," and I walked into the rain with a steadiness that felt like a revelation, unaware that the bridge we were building had already reached the point where turning back would mean falling. I went home buzzing, changed into dry clothes, stared at my ceiling, and decided that when our next session ended I would stop orbiting and ask a question that required a real answer, not about macros or mobility, but about the way night followed her like a well-trained animal and why I kept catching starlight in her eyes when there was no sky in the gym. The storm tapered to mist, and the city slept on, and I lay awake rehearsing words I would inevitably forget, counting beats the way she taught me, wondering if the truth would break us open or set us free, and not knowing for the first time in years felt less like fear and more like the taste of a story just beginning. The sessions stacked like beads on a string, each night another excuse to abandon the noise of the world and step into the amber cocoon where Luna existed, precise and patient, and the gym became less a place of sweat and steel than a chapel where I relearned the language of my body under her gaze. She carried herself with unshakable calm, as though nothing in the late hours could disturb her, and I began to crave that steadiness almost as much as the training itself. Our conversations deepened. In the quiet between sets, when the hum of the fluorescent lights and the clatter of a lone treadmill formed the backdrop of confessions I didn't even know I was ready to give, like how I had once loved running until work devoured my mornings, how I sometimes forgot whole days and only realized it when the sun had vanished, how I feared that my life was slipping into something beige and half-lived. And she listened with a gravity that made me feel as though my words weren't trivial complaints, but coordinates on a map she was memorizing carefully. She offered little about herself in return, but when she did it was enough to haunt me. A book she loved about exile and identity, a story of learning to fight without anger, a hint that she had once traveled far and wide though she never said when or how, and always her answers closed with that soft redirect, back to my form, my breathing, my goals. And yet the more she withheld, the more I wanted. Sometimes I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, not in the way a coach checks alignment, but with something like hunger, like curiosity sharpened into something warmer, and the weight of that gaze set my skin alight more than any exercise. One night she adjusted my posture on a lunge, her hands on my hips, firm but careful, and my exhale stuttered. Her eyes flicked up to mine in the mirror, and for a heartbeat we both froze, the air thick with something we couldn't name, until she stepped back smoothly, voice steady, telling me to drive through my heel, but I heard the faint hitch in her tone, as if she felt it too, and was just as terrified. The strangeness of her habits grew sharper the more I paid attention. How she never sipped water no matter how long the session. How she deflected invitations to grab a smoothie after with a polite smile. How her skin remained impossibly cool to the touch even when she pressed against my forearm to correct my grip. How her schedule was carved from midnight to dawn as if daylight didn't exist in her vocabulary. Once, after a brutal circuit, I laughed breathlessly and teased, "Do you just live in this gym? You're like some kind of phantom trainer." And she smiled, but her eyes softened with something almost wistful as she said, "Maybe I do." Before quickly turning the subject to stretching, I started to notice that when she smiled too widely under the dim lights, her teeth seemed sharper. Not grotesquely, not impossibly, but enough to make me blink and question if exhaustion was playing tricks on me. And though I told myself not to chase ghosts, the seed of curiosity had already rooted in me. Love what you've seen so far and want to help me keep creating these awesome stories on this channel? Then subscribe and hit the bell. Your subscription supports the channel and makes sure you get more exciting stories. Attraction between us simmered just beneath the surface, impossible to ignore. When her hand steadied my shoulder during bench presses, I imagined leaning just an inch further. When she counted out my reps, her voice low and steady, I imagined how it would sound whispering my name in a different context. And when she stood close enough for me to smell the faint, unfamiliar scent of her, not perfume, not sweat, something clean and dark like rain on stone, I imagined burying myself in it until I forgot everything else. One evening, she surprised me by ending the workout with a walk outside instead of the usual cool-down, saying the night air would do me good, and we strolled through empty streets under flickering street lamps, our steps sinking without effort, and the city felt softer, stripped of its noise, just us and the rhythm of footsteps. She asked if I ever felt lonelier in crowds than I did alone, and I admitted yes, more often than I cared to confess, and she nodded like she understood in a way words couldn't capture. When a car passed and headlights cut across her face, for a split second her eyes glimmered in a way that seemed unnatural, catching the light too brightly, too hungrily. But then it was gone, replaced with her usual calm, and I wondered if it was only my imagination, a trick of tired eyes, yet the image lingered long after we said goodnight. That night, I couldn't sleep, tossing beneath sheets, thinking of the way she'd tucked a loose strand of my hair behind my ear before we parted, her fingers barely grazing my skin, and the heat of that touch spread through me in waves until I pressed my palm against the spot, as if I could hold the echo of her there forever. Weeks passed, and our rapport grew so natural it startled me, as though we had known each other for lifetimes instead of months. Conversations slipping easily from books to memories to the strange ache of being human in a world that asked too much and gave too little, and every silence between us felt charged, comfortable yet waiting, like the pause before music swells. Still, I couldn't shake the question gnawing at me. Why only nights? Why never mornings? Why this aura of secrecy wrapped around her like a cloak? And though I rehearsed ways to ask, my courage faltered each time when faced with the softness of her smile, the steady calm of her presence, the possibility that pulling too hard at the threads might unravel everything we had built. One session, when she corrected my deadlift, standing so close behind me I could feel the ghost of her breath on my neck, the words nearly slipped out. "Tell me who you are. Tell me why you feel both familiar and impossible." But she straightened before I spoke, clapped once, and told me to rack the bar, her tone brisk but her eyes lingering just a fraction too long on mine, and I knew then that whatever secret she carried was bound to me too, tangled now in the web of glances and touches and unsaid truths I promised myself I would ask soon. But in the meantime, I let myself drown in the magnetic pull of her presence, training harder than I ever had, not for the mirror, not for the progress chart, but for the chance to see pride flicker in her eyes, to hear her murmur "good" in that velvet tone, to feel her touch steady me even if only for a breath. And though I still told myself I was imagining the sharpened edges of her smile, or the way shadows clung to her like they were old friends, a part of me began to wonder if Luna was not just a trainer working nights, but a mystery carved in flesh and silence, waiting for me to be brave enough to ask the question that might change everything. By the third month, I no longer pretended the pull I felt toward Luna was a harmless crush born of late-night endorphins. It was gravity, quiet and undeniable, and every session left me trembling less from exertion than from the sheer effort of holding myself together beneath her gaze. And it was in the smallest details that the truth bled through. The way she steadied me with a touch that lingered half a second too long. The way her voice dropped softer when she said my name. The way her eyes searched mine as though she were reading something written between breaths. One night we worked through a circuit so brutal I collapsed onto the mat, laughing breathlessly, and she crouched beside me, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face without thinking, her fingers cool against my temple, and when I stilled under the contact, she froze too, our eyes locking, silence stretching until she murmured, "You're stronger than you think," as though the words meant more than just muscle, and I wanted to answer, to tell her that she was the reason I kept showing up, the reason I was changing, but my throat refused and I only smiled, small and helpless, before she withdrew her hand with the same care one uses to close a fragile book. After that, I began noticing the way our conversations curved toward intimacy even when they started with something ordinary, like how I mentioned a nightmare, and she responded by describing how she often felt like the world was sharpest when everyone else was asleep, how night wasn't loneliness to her but possibility, a time when the noise dulled enough for truth to breathe, and I admitted I often felt most alive in those hours too, the stolen slices of time after responsibility had gone quiet, and she smiled, soft and knowing, and said, "Maybe that's why you found me." And the way she said it made my chest ache, as though she had named something neither of us dared admit. The strangeness of her habits pressed harder on my mind the closer we grew. But instead of scaring me, it fascinated me more, pulling me in like a story half told, like the glint of a secret just underwater. She still never ate or drank, not once in all those weeks, and when I teased her about surviving on starlight, she laughed, low and musical, and said, "You'd be surprised what the body can adapt to," her eyes flashing with something unreadable that sent shivers through me. One evening during assisted stretches, she guided my leg upward until I felt the deep pull in my hamstring, and her hands on my ankle and thigh were firm, yet impossibly gentle, her body so close I could feel the hum of her breath against my calf, and though the gym was empty save for us, I flushed as though the whole world could see the heat curling between us. And when she instructed me to breathe through the stretch, I exhaled shakily, my lips parting around her name, and she stilled, her gaze lifting to mine. The charged silence, so heavy I thought it might break me in two, but then she smiled faintly and shifted the angle, professional again though her hands trembled just barely where they held me. I left that night dizzy, the ghost of her touch burning long after, and realized that whatever we were doing, it was no longer just training, it was a dance neither of us knew the steps to, but both were unwilling to stop. Our routines became rituals. The quiet greeting, the lamps she dimmed to that amber glow that made shadows soft, the way we lingered after the last set, talking until the attendant yawned and jingled his keys, and every time she walked me to my car she paused, as if on the edge of something unsaid, her eyes tracing my face with a tenderness that felt like it belonged to another life. One rainy night, when thunder cracked overhead, we found ourselves stranded inside after closing, the storm flooding the streets too fast to leave, and she suggested we wait it out, pulling mats into a corner and sitting cross-legged across from me, the two of us cocooned in dim light and storm sound, and she asked me about the first moment I remembered feeling alive in my own skin, and I confessed it was when I was 12, sneaking out to swim in a neighbor's pool under a full moon, the water silver and secret, and I asked her the same, and she hesitated before saying, "The first time someone touched me and saw me for what I was, not what they wanted me to be." And though the words were simple, her tone was so raw I felt them in my chest like a bruise, and without thinking I reached across the small space and laced my fingers with hers. Her hand was cool, steady, and when she looked at me there was no smile, only intensity, only that bright pull that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing you will jump. And then lightning lit the glass and we both startled, breaking the moment. But she didn't let go of my hand until the thunder faded. After that night, something shifted. Our touches grew bolder, our glances longer, our silences heavier, and though she still held herself back with iron discipline, I began to sense the crack in her armor, the want she tried to bury, and it mirrored my own. I dreamed of her often now. Not in elaborate fantasies, but in quiet scenes, her hand on my cheek, her voice whispering steady as I slept, and I woke longing, restless, more certain with every passing night that I had stumbled into something bigger than desire, something older than time, and though the questions clawed at me, why she never ate, why her hours belonged only to the dark, why her eyes seemed lit from within, I began to think the answers mattered less than the truth already in my chest. I was falling for her, and no secret, no strangeness, no fear could stop me. The line between trainer and something else blurred so completely by the 4th month that I stopped pretending we were just two women sharing a gym after midnight. It was obvious in the way she lingered when guiding me through movements, in the way her voice softened when she said my name, in the way my pulse jumped every time her cool fingers corrected my form. And by then, I was less afraid of what might happen if I leaned in than of what might happen if I didn't. One night she decided to test my limits with a superset that left my muscles trembling, sweat dripping down my spine as she stood behind me, her hand grazing the line of my back, murmuring encouragement so low it felt more like an intimate secret than instruction. And when I dropped the weight at last and staggered to the mat, she crouched down beside me, close enough that her hair brushed my cheek, and said, "Breathe with me," matching her inhales to mine until my chest steadied, her eyes locked to mine the whole time. Steady and unyielding, and I wondered if she realized how much more unsteady she made me by simply existing this close. The gym was almost empty, the attendant gone early, and the silence between us grew louder than any music, punctuated only by the hiss of the AC and the hammering of my heart. And when she reached to adjust the collar of my shirt where it had slipped, her fingers barely grazing my collarbone, I shivered in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her eyes flicked down, lingered, then returned to mine, and for a breath the world narrowed into that space between us, fragile and electric, as if the kiss already existed and we were just deciding when to claim it. But then she drew back suddenly, standing with a smoothness that felt practiced, her expression unreadable as she said briskly, "Stretching, come on," and I followed in silence, my whole body burning with the ghost of what almost was. Later, as we moved through assisted stretches, she knelt behind me, guiding my arms upward, her chest pressed lightly against my back, and the steady rhythm of her breathing against me nearly undid me, so much so that when she whispered, "Relax," I almost laughed at the impossibility of the command, but instead I let my head fall back slightly until it rested against her shoulder, and for one dangerous second, she didn't move, didn't correct, didn't retreat, just let me lean into her. And the warmth of that contact, however brief, set my entire body alight. After the session, we lingered in the quiet lobby, rain tapping against the glass outside, and she walked me to my car as always, her hand hovering close to the small of my back as though she might steady me at any moment. And when we stopped at my door, the air felt thick with unsaid words, her gaze dropping to my lips and mine to hers, and I swore if the world had gone silent for one more heartbeat, I would have closed the distance. But instead she looked away sharply, stepping back, her voice calm but low as she said, "Get home safe," and the way her jaw tightened betrayed that it wasn't calmness she was fighting, but something else entirely. I sat in the car after she left, staring at the steering wheel, my breath shallow, replaying the almost kiss, the almost embrace, the almost confession, and realized that the space between almost and inevitable was shrinking fast, and sooner or later one of us would break it. The next session, I arrived determined to test the boundaries, pushing harder through each set, refusing to look away when her eyes lingered, letting my touches linger too when she adjusted me, and by the end of the hour there was a charge in the air so sharp it felt like static before a storm, and as I sat tying my shoes she came over and knelt in front of me, one hand braced on the bench between my knees, her face so close I could see the flecks of silver in her irises, and she asked softly, "Why do you keep coming back?" And the honesty slipped out before I could filter it. because it feels like you're the only thing keeping me alive." And the silence that followed was deafening, her lips parting, her eyes searching mine, and for a heartbeat I thought she would kiss me right there. Consequences be damned, but she closed her eyes instead, drawing in a long breath, and when she opened them again her voice was steadier than I expected. "Don't say things you don't understand," she murmured, and it was a plea, not a reprimand. A crack in the armor, but I didn't retract, I only whispered back, "I understand more than you think," and the way she looked at me then, raw and vulnerable, told me she knew it too. Still, she stood, offering me her hand to help me up, the tension simmering between us like a secret fire neither of us dared to feed, and I took it, holding on a second too long, our eyes locked, promises unspoken, and though we parted again without crossing the line, I knew the line was gone. What stood between us now was not a boundary but inevitability, waiting only for the moment one of us chose to surrender. By the time the 5th month settled and I was no longer just a client, and Luna was no longer just a trainer, though neither of us dared to speak aloud what had been building in the silence between sets. It lived in the way her eyes lingered on me when she thought I wasn't looking, in the way my body leaned unconsciously toward hers when she corrected my form. In the nights I stayed awake, replaying the brush of her fingers along my spine, or the weight of her gaze across a dim room. And though nothing physical had yet broken the boundary we pretended still existed, the air around us was heavy with the promise of it, the inevitability of it, the waiting that tasted like temptation. One late night she surprised me by suggesting we train outside, the weather unseasonably warm, and we jogged through empty streets beneath orange lamps. The city hushed except for our footsteps and the occasional hiss of passing tires on wet asphalt, and I could feel the nearness of her, the rhythm of her breath just behind me, the way her shadow overlapped mine when we ran side by side, and when we finally slowed by the river she guided me through stretches under the pale glow of the bridge lights, her hands steadying my hips as I bent forward, her voice low in my ear reminding me to breathe, and the intimacy of it felt indecent though no one was there to see. I told her then, breathless, that it felt strange to be so awake at hours when the world was asleep, and she smiled faintly, saying, "Maybe this is when people see most clearly," and the way her eyes lingered on mine made me think she wasn't talking about exercise at all. Another night, she brought out resistance bands and knelt behind me as I anchored them, her hand brushing against my wrist to adjust the grip, and the shock of her cool skin sent sparks racing through me, so much that I nearly dropped the band, and she laughed softly, not mocking but tender, like she knew the effect she had and regretted it even as she allowed it, and the sound of her laughter lived in my chest for days. The gym was always nearly empty when we trained, but there was one evening when a group of young men stumbled and drunk from a bar, loud and careless, and one of them muttered something crude about me as they passed, and before I could respond, Luna stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting as she said, "Leave," and they did, almost instantly, as if something in her gaze unnerved them, and I stood stunned, the echo of her protectiveness thrumming through me, and when she turned back her eyes softened, her hand brushing my arm just briefly as she murmured, "Are you all right?" And I nodded. But the truth was I was shaken not by their words, but by the way her presence felt like a shield I hadn't realized I'd been craving. After that night, I began to see the edges of vulnerability in her, the cracks in the perfect calm she wore like armor. When she thought I wasn't watching, her expression softened into something almost sorrowful. When she lingered too long in silence, her hands flexed as though resisting an urge. When our eyes met too long, her breath caught just faintly, betraying the control she fought to maintain. One session I confessed how I often felt invisible in my daily life, swallowed by work and expectation, and she looked at me so intently I had to look away, her voice low as she said, "You are anything but invisible." And the words carved themselves into me, so much more than reassurance. A truth she believed with a conviction I couldn't ignore, and I wanted to tell her then that she was the only one who had ever made me feel seen, but the words stuck in my throat, trembling between fear and desire. The near misses kept piling, moments where her lips hovered too close to mine during a stretch, moments where her hand lingered on my shoulder as though reluctant to leave, moments where we both fell silent, eyes locked, breaths uneven, and the world seemed to pause around us, waiting for one of us to be brave. But each time she retreated, drawing a careful line with her calm voice, though her eyes betrayed the storm she carried. One night after a particularly grueling workout, I collapsed onto the mat, drenched in sweat, chest heaving, and she sat beside me instead of standing, her thigh pressed lightly against mine, her hand resting on the floor so close I could feel the ghost of her warmth. And we sat like that for long minutes without speaking, the silence more intimate than words, until finally she said softly, "I don't know what this is, but it's dangerous." And my heart clenched because it was the closest she had come to naming it, and I whispered back, "Then why does it feel like the only thing that's ever made sense?" And her eyes closed for a moment, her jaw tight, before she rose abruptly, offering me her hand with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes, saying, "Come on, you'll be sore tomorrow if you don't stretch." And I took her hand, holding it a second longer than necessary, committing the shape of it to memory, the coolness, the strength, and though she pulled away gently, the echo of her touch burned through me all night. By now it was clear that we were circling something inevitable, orbiting closer with every session, every glance, every word, and though she fought it with all the discipline she had, I could see the truth written in her gaze when it lingered on me too long, in the softness of her smile when she thought I wasn't looking, in the way her hands shook the tiniest bit when they touched mine, and I knew with a certainty that scared and thrilled me both that sooner or later one of us would break the silence, and when that moment came there would be no going back, only forward, into whatever waited in the dark. It happened on a night that wasn't meant to be different, another late session under the amber glow she preferred, the gym silent except for the hum of the AC and the muted rhythm of some playlist I couldn't even hear over the thrum of my pulse. But from the start something in her felt less contained, her eyes lingering longer, her voice lower, her touches a fraction slower, as though she too was tired of running from what pressed so insistently between us. She pushed me through a brutal set of weighted squats, standing close behind me, one hand steadying my waist, the other hovering just in case, her breath brushing the back of my neck each time I rose, and by the last rep my legs trembled so violently I nearly fell, but she caught me with both hands, pulling me upright against her body, and for a suspended moment we stood chest to chest, my breath ragged, her expression unreadable, her eyes burning into mine with such intensity one forgot the ache in my muscles, forgot the gym, forgot the world, and the distance between us collapsed before I could think. Her lips met mine in a rush, cool and urgent, and the shock of it stole the air from my lungs, her mouth pressing with a hunger she had buried for too long, and I answered without hesitation, my hands fisting in the fabric of her shirt, pulling her closer, closer, as if I could disappear inside the kiss and never come back. The world tilted, my knees weak, but she held me steady. Her fingers splayed across my back, trembling despite her strength, and the kiss deepened, messy and raw, not the careful almosts we had traded for weeks, but the breaking of a dam, and when she finally pulled back we were both gasping, foreheads pressed together, her voice a broken whisper. "I shouldn't have, but you did," I interrupted, breathless, my heart hammering so loud I could hardly hear my own voice, and so did I. And I kissed her again, softer this time, slower, a question instead of a demand, and she answered with a low sound that reverberated through me, a sound equal parts need and surrender. She pulled away once more, eyes wide, chest rising and falling too quickly, and I saw fear flicker there, not of me but of herself, of what she had let slip through her careful control, and she said, almost pleading, "Sophia, you don't understand what this means." And I cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to look at me, whispering, "Then show me, let me understand." And for a second she nearly yielded again, her lips brushing mine in ghostly hesitation, but then she stepped back abruptly, putting space between us, running a shaking hand through her hair as she said, "This can't happen," her voice steadier than her body, and the words sliced through me even as her flushed cheeks and trembling hands betrayed the truth. I stood frozen, my lips still tingling, my chest aching, and asked quietly, "Do you regret it?" And her silence was answer enough, because though she didn't speak, her eyes screamed no, screamed want, screamed fear, and I knew regret had nothing to do with it. We finished the session in silence, our bodies moving through the motions but our thoughts elsewhere, the kiss thrumming between us like an unhealed wound, and when it ended she walked me to my car as always, but this time she didn't hover politely at the edge. She stood close, so close I could smell the strange, cool scent of her. So close her hand brushed mine, but didn't take it. And in the charged silence I whispered, "This isn't nothing, Luna." And she exhaled sharply, her eyes dark as she whispered back, "No, it's everything," before turning away into the night. I drove home shaking, lips swollen, mind reeling, the taste of her still on my mouth, the image of her eyes seared into me, and though she had tried to put distance between us, I knew the truth now, undeniable, inescapable. She wanted me as much as I wanted her, and whatever secret she carried, whatever danger she feared, it was already too late for both of us. We had crossed the line, and there was no going back. After the kiss, there was no going back, and though Luna tried at first to fold herself back into the cool professionalism she had worn like armor for months, it crumbled within days, because the air between us had changed irreversibly. Every silence thick with the memory of her mouth on mine, every touch charged with the knowledge of how easily it could tip into more, and by the second session after that night we stopped pretending. She had me on the mat finishing a plank sequence, her hand steadying my hips, and when my arms gave out I collapsed laughing, rolling onto my back, and she dropped beside me, our faces inches apart, and without a word she kissed me again, deeper, hungrier, until the gym dissolved around us. After that we found excuses to linger, to draw out the hours long past the end of training, sitting together on the mats in the dim light, talking about nothing and everything, our shoulders brushing, her cool fingers tracing idle lines on my wrist as if memorizing me. One night I reached for her first, tugging her against me in the quiet lobby after closing, and the kiss we shared then was desperate, unrestrained, my back against a glass door, her body pressing into mine with a need she could no longer disguise, and when she pulled away, her lips swollen, her eyes dark, she whispered, "I've tried so long not to want this," and I answered against her mouth, "Then stop trying." And the sound she made, half surrender, half hunger, ignited something inside me I knew would never extinguish. We stole moments wherever we could, in the quiet corners of the gym, in the empty parking lot beneath the broken streetlight, in my car where her hands tangled in my hair and her breath cooled my skin until I shook, and the more we touched the less either of us could tolerate the distance, our sessions becoming prelude to something neither of us could resist anymore. But the closer we drew, the more I saw the shadows in her eyes, the weight of something unspoken, dragging at her even in the softest moments, and when I pressed she would only shake her head, murmuring, "Not yet, not tonight," as if the truth itself was dangerous. It was after one of those nights, when she left abruptly after holding me so tightly I could feel her trembling, that I met Violet. I had returned to the gym the next evening without Luna, thinking perhaps she'd canceled, only to find the space eerily empty, the lamps off, and in the corner a woman I had never seen before, standing perfectly still, tall and striking with hair the color of midnight velvet, skin pale as carved stone, and eyes so ancient and sharp I felt as though she saw not just me but every ancestor in my bloodline. She smiled slowly, a curve of lips that was beautiful and terrifying all at once, and said in a voice that rolled like thunder held captive in silk, "So you're the one keeping her busy at night." And the way she said her made my chest tighten. I stammered something, an apology, a question, but she only stepped closer, her presence suffocating, magnetic, impossible to ignore, and added, "Luna was never meant to stay away this long. She belongs to me." And I understood then with icy clarity that whoever she was, she had known Luna far longer and far deeper than I could comprehend. Before I could respond, Luna appeared suddenly from the shadows, her body taut with tension, her eyes flashing in a way I had never seen, and she stepped between us, her voice low and sharp as a blade. "Violet, you shouldn't be here." The other woman, Violet, only tilted her head, her eyes flicking between us with amusement. Shouldn't? Or can't stop me. You forget, little one, who gave you this life. Who made you. You are mine, whether you play at humanity or not. My breath caught as the words settled, pieces snapping into place. The impossible coolness of Luna's skin, the way she never ate, never sweated, never came out in the day, the glimmer of her teeth, the unearthly stillness. And though the revelation should have terrified me, all I felt was a strange clarity, as if I had known all along. Luna stiffened, her jaw clenched, and without turning she said softly, "Sophia, go." But I couldn't move, couldn't leave her. Not now, not ever, and Violet smiled. Wider at my defiance, murmuring, "Oh, she's bold, this one. No wonder you're enthralled." Then stepping closer until the air between us vibrated, and though she never touched me, I felt her presence like a hand at my throat, cool and commanding, and Luna snapped. Enough! With a force that echoed off the walls, her whole body vibrating with a power she had never let me see before. Violet only laughed, low and cruel, before turning toward the door, her cloak swirling like smoke. "I'll give you time, Luna," she said sweetly, "but you'll come back. You always do. You are mine, and nothing mortal can change that." She left as silently as she had come, and the silence she left behind was suffocating. I turned to Luna, my voice shaking. "Who is that?" And she looked at me with eyes so haunted I almost broke, whispering, "The one who made me what I am, the one I've been running from for centuries." And for the first time since I'd met her, Luna looked afraid. After Violet's appearance, nothing felt safe anymore. The fragile cocoon Luna and I had built around midnight hours and whispered touches ripped open by the weight of centuries I could barely comprehend. And yet, even as fear wrapped itself around me like cold air, I couldn't stay away. If anything, the danger made the pull between us more urgent, more undeniable. And within days we were meeting not just at the gym, but in stolen moments anywhere we could hide, a hunger that had been simmering for months now, burning too hot to suppress. We kissed with desperation against mirrors, in the shadows of stairwells, in the back seat of my car parked far from the streetlights, each touch threaded with the knowledge that time was no longer ours, that Violet's shadow lingered at the edge of every silence. But the more Luna tried to push me away, warning in a voice that shook, "You don't understand what she can do," the tighter I held her, whispering back, "Then let her come. I'm not afraid if it means I'm with you." And though her eyes glistened with something like terror, she kissed me as though I was the only anchor she had left. Violet didn't stay in the shadows long. She appeared again 2 nights later, this time outside my apartment, leaning against the brick wall like she had been waiting centuries just to watch me flinch, her presence heavy with elegance and menace. And when I demanded what she wanted, she smiled slowly and said, "I want what's mine, and I want you to understand how little you matter in comparison." And though my hands shook, I told her she was wrong, that Luna chose me, not her, and her laughter rolled over me like thunder, low and cruel. "She will always come back, little mortal, because I am the beginning and the end of her hunger, the one who made her, the one who will unmake her." And before I could respond, Luna was suddenly there, pulling me behind her, her voice like steel as she snapped, "Leave her out of this, Violet. Whatever you want, take it from me." But Violet only tilted her head, eyes glinting. "What I want is you, as you were meant to be, not this fragile imitation of humanity you cling to," then brushing her gaze over me with disdain, "and certainly not wasting yourself on this fleeting distraction." Luna's whole body trembled, but she held her ground, snarling, "I am not yours anymore." And for the first time I saw a flicker of fury in Violet's face, the mask cracking just enough to reveal something vast and terrifying beneath. She vanished into the night with a promise, her voice echoing, "We will see how long you believe that." And when she was gone, I clutched Luna's hand, whispering, "Don't let her take you." And the way her arms wrapped around me, desperate and shaking, told me she feared exactly that. After that night, Luna confessed more than she ever had, how Violet had turned her centuries ago, how she had once been her partner, bound not by love but by obsession, how she had fled when she realized eternity with Violet meant nothing but control and emptiness, how every decade she moved, changed her name, built walls of secrecy around her life to stay free, and as she spoke her voice cracked with something like shame, as though she feared I would recoil, but all I did was hold her tighter, whispering, "You're not hers, you're mine." And she looked at me with eyes wet and raw, whispering back, "If only it were that simple," before kissing me like she was afraid it would be the last time. Violet became a shadow haunting us, sometimes a glimpse across the street, sometimes a cold sensation in the gym when we trained, sometimes a whisper of movement outside my apartment window, and though Luna tried to shield me, her fear only fueled my defiance, and one night when Violet appeared again, sliding between us with her endless poise, I stood my ground, snapping, "You can't stop her from loving me." And Violet smiled like a wolf, purring, "Love is a mortal word, dear, and it dies as quickly as your kind does." But even as she spoke, Luna stepped to my side, taking my hand openly, saying with more strength than I had ever heard, "Then let me die loving her, because I would rather burn with Sophia for a year than rot in your eternity." And the fury that twisted Violet's face then was enough to chill me to my core. The nights that followed were stolen and urgent. Every touch between us edged with the knowledge that Violet could tear it away at any moment, and it made our intimacy reckless, frantic, her lips on my skin, my hands tangled in her hair, her whispers against my ear like prayers spoken in secret. And though fear stalked us, I felt more alive than ever, because whatever this was, it was ours, chosen and burning, and no ancient vampire could unmake the truth carved between our hearts. Violet's patience ended on a night that felt too still, the gym empty except for Luna and me, her hands guiding mine through a final rep, her lips brushing the crown of my head in a stolen kiss that tasted more like a promise than indulgence. And for a moment I believed maybe we had won a little piece of eternity for ourselves. But then the lights flickered. A cold wind swept the room though no window was open, and she was there, Violet, standing at the far end of the gym, like she owned the space, her presence pressing down on us until even the air felt heavy. Luna stiffened instantly, stepping between us, her voice sharp and shaking. "Leave her alone, Violet." But the older vampire only smiled, slow and cruel, her eyes glimmering as they fixed on me. "So this is what all your rebellion amounts to, Luna, a mortal girl who will wrinkle and rot before your next century begins." And the disdain in her tone burned through me, but I stood my ground, pushing past Luna until I faced Violet directly, my voice trembling but steady. "You don't own her, and you can't scare me away." And Violet's laugh rolled like velvet thunder, amused and hungry. "Little mortal, bravery is so sweet when it comes from ignorance, but you have no idea what you're standing against." She stepped closer, her movements too smooth, too silent, like shadows come alive, and Luna grabbed my hand, pulling me back, whispering, "Don't, she's dangerous." But I shook my head, my voice breaking. "I won't hide behind you, not from her, not from anyone." And for the first time Violet's smile faltered, just slightly, before twisting into something darker. "Then you are even more foolish than I thought." It happened fast, too fast, her hand flashing like lightning, a blur of pale fingers and steel strength, and pain seared through my side, hot and merciless, as her nails cut deep, sharper than any blade, blood spilling warm and sudden across my ribs. I cried out, collapsing into Luna's arms, the world spinning red and black, and Luna's scream tore through the air, raw and unearthly, as though centuries of restraint had shattered in a single heartbeat. She knelt with me on the floor, her hands pressing against the wound, her cool touch already slick with my blood, her eyes wild with terror, whispering, "Stay with me, please, stay with me." But the darkness crept fast, heavy and cold, and I could barely breathe, my vision blurring until all I could see was her face, pale and desperate, tears streaking down porcelain skin that had never cracked before. Violet stood above us, calm and merciless, her voice soft as poison. "You see, Luna, mortals always break, always bleed, always die, and now you must choose. Save her in the only way you can, or let her fade like all the others." And I realized, through the haze of pain, what she meant. the truth that had been shimmering just out of reach. Luna could make me like her, eternal, unbreaking, or I would die there in her arms. Luna shook her head violently, sobbing, "No, I can't. I swore I would never damn anyone else to this." But Violet crouched, her eyes blazing with triumph. "You already damned her the moment you let her love you. The only question is whether you will keep her, or bury her." And my breath hitched, weak, broken, but I forced the words out, my hand clutching Luna's sleeve. "Please don't let me go." And her eyes locked on mine, horror and love and desperation twisting inside her until her lips trembled with a decision she had never wanted to make. "I can't lose you," she whispered, pressing her forehead to mine. "Forgive me, Sophia, please forgive me." And then her mouth moved to my neck, her fangs sliding into my skin with a shocking, electric pain that flared and then dissolved into fire and light, my blood rushing out as hers poured in, her arms holding me so tightly I thought she would crush me, her sobs vibrating against my throat as Violet watched, smiling like a predator who had won, whispering, "Welcome her to eternity, little one, whether she thanks you or curses you." And as the darkness swallowed me whole, the last thing I felt was Luna's lips on my skin, her voice trembling against my ear. "Live, Sophia, live with me." I woke to silence, so deep it felt like I had been buried underwater. The world muffled and strange, and for a moment I thought I had died, that the last thing I would ever remember was the taste of Luna's kiss and the cold of her tears against my skin. But then my eyes opened, and the darkness wasn't empty, it was alive. Every flicker of light sharper, every shadow deeper, every sound in the room thrumming against me like music, and I gasped, sitting up, only to realize I didn't need air the way I had before, my lungs filling out of habit rather than necessity. Luna was beside me, on her knees, her face pale and stricken, her hands trembling as they hovered inches from my body as if afraid to touch me, and when our eyes met I saw the centuries in hers, the fear, the sorrow, the desperate hope, and she whispered, "Sophia," like it was both prayer and apology. I reached for her hand instinctively, and when our skin touched the world ignited, her coolness no longer startling but familiar, resonant, as though the same current now ran through both of us, and I whispered, "I'm still here," my voice steadier than I expected, lower, sharper, carrying a weight it hadn't before. She broke then, her forehead falling against mine, her arms wrapping around me, her sobs shaking her body, and she kept whispering, I'm sorry, I swore I'd never do this to anyone," and I cupped her face, forcing her to look at me. "You saved me, Luna, you didn't damn me. You saved me." And though her tears didn't stop, her lips found mine, desperate and trembling, and the kiss tasted different now, sharper, more electric, the bond between us thrumming like fire braided through our veins. The moment shattered when Violet's voice filled the room, rich and cruel. "Beautiful, isn't it? The first awakening, the rush of eternity, the hunger." And she stepped from the shadows with a smile that cut like glass, her eyes glinting as they swept over me. "Welcome, little fledgling. Welcome to the world you cannot leave. Tell me, Luna, does it feel familiar, remaking another in your own image, just as I did with you?" And I felt Luna tense against me, her body coiled with fury and grief, but I stood, shaky yet filled with a strength that surged unnatural through me, the pain of my wound gone, replaced with raw power, the thrum of blood, or the memory of it, singing in my veins. Violet circled us like a predator, her voice low and hypnotic. "You don't belong to her, Sophia. You belong to me. By blood, by lineage, by eternity. You carry my gift now, whether you like it or not." But I straightened, my voice ringing with certainty I hadn't known I possessed. "No, I don't belong to you. I belong to her, and she belongs to me." And Violet's smile faltered for the first time, her eyes narrowing as she hissed, "You think love is stronger than the hunger, stronger than centuries, stronger than me." And Luna stepped forward, her voice fierce and shaking. "It is, Violet, it always was. I stayed with you out of fear, out of obligation, but never out of love, and you will never have me again." And Violet's face twisted, rage finally cracking the mask of her elegance, and in a blur of motion she lunged, her strength shaking the ground. But I moved too, faster than I could comprehend, intercepting her before she reached Luna, our bodies colliding with a force that sent shockwaves through the empty gym. The fight was chaos and clarity at once, her strength ancient and overwhelming, mine newborn but wild, fueled by something she had never possessed. Love that burned like fire in every strike, every desperate push. She pinned me against the wall, her fangs flashing as she snarled, "You are nothing but a child," and I spat back, "Then you should be afraid of me," driving her back with a surge of strength I didn't know I had, the memory of Luna's kiss steadying me, the thought of losing her fueling me. Luna joined me, the two of us moving together, as though we had trained for this all our lives, seamless, her strikes graceful, mine brutal, our bond making us one force, and at last we cornered Violet, forcing her against the mirror she had first appeared in, her face twisted in disbelief as I gripped her arms, Luna's hand to her throat, and for the first time in centuries she looked afraid. "Let me go," she hissed. "You cannot kill me. I made you both. You are mine." But Luna's voice rang like steel. "We were never yours, Violet. We are ours." And together we drove. Her back, shattering the mirror behind her, shards slicing through her body as her scream tore through the gym, dissolving into silence as her form crumbled into shadow and dust, leaving nothing but the echo of her fury in the air. The quiet after was unbearable, the gym ruined around us, the night outside pressing close, and I turned to Luna, my body trembling not from weakness, but from the flood of what I had become, and whispered, "It's over." And she nodded, tears streaking her face, whispering back, "It's over," before pulling me into her arms, holding me as though she would never let go. The days that followed were a blur of discovery, learning the hunger that hummed beneath my skin, the way the world had shifted into sharper colors, the way the night felt like home now, but none of it mattered compared to the way Luna's hand never left mine, the way her eyes softened each time she looked at me, no longer filled with fear but with something new, something freer. We left the city, left the gym, left the ghosts Violet had tried to bind us with, and found a small house at the edge of the woods where the stars were brighter and the nights endless, and there we built something that belonged only to us, training still, laughing, touching, loving, not as mortal and mentor but as equals, partners, bound not by blood or eternity but by choice. One night, lying together under the open sky, I turned to her and said, "You gave me forever." And she whispered back, "No, you gave me love, and that is greater than forever." And when her lips found mine, the world stilled. No hunger, no fear, just us, immortal not because of the curse Violet had tried to trap us in, but because love had already made us eternal. And that is how it ended. Not with shadows, not with loss, but with two women who chose each other, again and again, against every law of nature and time, until eternity was not a prison, but home. Thank you so much for being here and for believing in this channel. If you feel in your heart, you can donate with super thanks so I can focus more and more on this project. Your support helps me keep creating these love stories and bringing them to life for you. See you in the next video.